Have you ever wondered what would happen if a war broke out among the Mafia? 5 men were lined up against a wall in Brooklyn, New York. They had been rounded up by the police and were going to be questioned about their involvement in a series of murders. But before they could say a word, a black van pulled up outside the precinct, and several armed men jumped out. What was supposed to be an interrogation turned into a massacre? And when the dust settled, the entire city was shaken to its core. The Mafia had declared war. What is happening? Who are the players involved? And how did things get so bad that even the police were caught in the crossfire? Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to find out the story of one of the bloodiest feuds in Mafia history, the day the Mafia went to war. For decades, the most powerful crime families in America have kept a fragile peace among themselves. But in the late 70s, the tranquility between them was shattered after the death of a mobster named Anthony Dux. Anthony was the underboss of the Lucchese crime family. After he died of cancer in 1979, his position needed to be filled. This wasn't particularly surprising, as Matthew was one of the most respected men in the Lucchese family. He had worked his way up the ranks by running numbers in narcotics rings, and was considered to be very loyal to the boss. His name was Joseph, but to everyone else, he was known as Joe the Animal. And he had his own reasons for wanting to become underboss. You see, Anthony Dux had taken Joe under his wing over the years and had made him his confidant. In fact, the two of them had become best friends. So after Anthony died, Joe was hoping to take over his position. Unfortunately for him, Matthew Madonna got the job instead. He was driven by a violent temper, a hunger for power, and an unquenchable lust for blood. So he decided to make a move on Matthew. And the first thing you need to know about making a move in the Mafia is that you can never go straight for the target. To do that would be a grave mistake, and possibly a death sentence. Instead, you have to work your way up slowly, carefully taking out each obstacle in front of you until you eventually reach your goal. This is something that Joe the Animal knew all too well, so he began plotting against Matthew with great care. You always have to prove yourself and show everyone that you deserve their admiration. And Joe the Animal was going to use this to his advantage. He began going around the family and telling everyone that Matthew had betrayed Anthony Dux, and that he himself had been passed over for the underboss position because of Matthew's scheming. This made quite a few enemies for Matthew and drove a wedge between him and the boss. But this alone wasn't enough, so Joe the Animal continued to plot. Eventually, he managed to convince several members of the family, including a hitman named Michael, that Matthew was a traitor who didn't deserve his position. On October 1979, these men carried out Joe's orders and killed Matthew Madonna. Although the murder shocked the family, and many people suspected that Joe was behind it, he was never charged. With the murder, Matthew was now dead, and Joe the Animal had eliminated his biggest rival. All that stood between him and the underboss position was the boss. To get to the top, Joe needed Fat Tony out of the way. But as far as he knew, Fat Tony's health was failing, and it wouldn't be long before he kicked the bucket. So Joe the Animal waited patiently for his chance. When Fat Tony finally died in 1982, Joe threw his hat into the ring and became the new underboss. Finally, he had the power and respect he always wanted. But unfortunately for him, his reign was short-lived. Soon after becoming underboss, Joe the Animal began to feel the heat from the other crime families. You see, no matter how much power you have in the Mafia, you always have to watch your back. There's never been a shortage of ambitious mobsters looking to take what you have. And in Joe's case, this meant war with the Bonanno crime family. Now normally, if two rival families are at war with each other, the other families will try to stay out of it. But Joe had made so many powerful enemies while working to take down Matthew Madonna that the other families felt threatened by him. In particular, the Bonanno family saw Joe's rise to power as a challenge to their authority. And soon, rumors were circulating that they had formed an alliance with the Gambino crime family to take Joe out. But Joe the Animal was not the kind of man to sit back and wait for his enemies to make their move. He struck first. Several members of the Bonanno crime family were attending a meeting in a small social club in Brooklyn. Suddenly, the door burst open, and several gunmen ran inside. They wasted no time in getting to the point, opening fire on the men inside. When the shooting stopped, 4 of the Bonanno soldiers were dead, including Rusty's brother Dominic. Another member of the Bonanno family, a man named Anthony Sparrow, was also gunned down. They had aligned themselves with the Genovese crime family and were prepared to go to war. The Bonanno family was furious. They immediately contacted the other families and an emergency meeting was called. It was decided that the only way to stop the bloodshed was to declare war on the Lucchese family and take out Joe the animal. The other families weren't happy about this, but they felt that they had no choice. They were taken to a local precinct for questioning. But before the cops could get any answers out of them, members of the Lucchese family launched a daring rescue mission. Armed men burst into the building and shot the 5 men dead. It was a declaration of war, and the Lucchese family wasn't done yet. On December, 2 members of the Bonanno family were arrested for a minor crime. But before they could be taken anywhere, members of the Lucchese family arrived and executed them on the spot. As the weeks went on, the violence only escalated. Members of the Bonanno family were ambushed and killed all over the place. At one point, the acting boss of the Bonanno family had to go into hiding because his life was in danger, but as the body count mounted, the other families began to grow weary of the violence. They didn't want to get involved in a full-blown gang war, and they pressured the Bonanno family to come to the negotiating table. Eventually, a truce was worked out, and the violence came to an end. But the war had taken a heavy toll on the families. Many innocent people were caught in the crossfire, and several members of the families were arrested by the police. In the end, Joe the animal came out on top. He had proven himself to be a worthy adversary and had eliminated many of his enemies. However, his victory was short-lived. Soon after the war ended, he was arrested for racketeering and spent several years in prison. When he was released, he was a changed man and eventually became an informant for the FBI. So there you have it, the story of the bloody war between the Lucchese and Bonanno crime families. It's a tale of betrayal, revenge, and all-out war. And it's a reminder of the lengths that mobsters will go to protect their power and respect. Thanks for watching.